Hello everyone, I am back and I am back with a new, very long video about authentication, Jwt authentication in NestJs. So I really want to make a very in-depth video about that subject because I noticed that there's a lot of stuff online, but nothing really explains it clearly and nothing really gives you all the right tools to make it work. So before we start, know that in most cases you should probably use sessions. That's what I understood from my research, that most of the time sessions is what you need. But if you want to use Jwt and you understand the downside of it, I think I have found the right kind of trade-off that will allow you to have pretty much all the functionalities you might need for your app. And it's not just a theoretical video, it will be also a practical video where we're going to code everything in NestJs following the best practices. But for now, let's get started with some use cases so we can really understand what we are doing. So in most videos online, I see one thing. People explain access tokens. They don't really explain refresh tokens. And they say something like, oh, you should call a local sign-in or sign-up route, and then you get an access token, and the access token will be like short-lived. It will be something for 15 minutes, and that's fine. That's fine. So basically, you sign in, you have a token, and then you can make requests for 15 minutes. Usually, when the 15 minutes are over, you need to sign in again. This is, of course, a bad thing. So what usually people do is that just before the end of or the expiration, let's say at the 14th minute, they send back the token. They send back a request to get a new token. So in that case, we have a very simple auth. So basically, you put your credentials, password and email, and you get an access token, and you can make API requests. This access token will be expired in let's say 15 minutes. That's usually the standard. If you want to be able to use your application longer without re-signing in, you usually have to implement a refresh route. So basically what is happening is that you need to then use a refresh token. So the access token will be short-lived for 15 minutes. The refresh token is usually for 1 week, right? So basically that means that if your user goes away for 3 days and comes back, he can use your app without having to re-sign in. Obviously, that's a given for a lot of users, and that's something that should work. So usually what we see is something like that. When you sign in, you receive a token pair, so access token and refresh token, and that's, for instance, what a access token might look like. You can put any claims, that's called a claim, in the JSON that you want, but most of the time you will have a sub for the kind of user ID. Usually it's unique ID, so not an integer, it's more like a string, like a UUID. You have email, creation date, I think, and expiration, right? And you would have something similar with the refresh token. And once you want to refresh your token, you want to get a new access token that will be short-lived again for the next 15 minutes. You provide the refresh token, and the server gives you back the access and refresh token pair together. So you replace them by the two you have. So every time you kind of, it's kind of a rent. You just have more time every time to use the app. So that's fine, but that has two main problems. The first problem is logout. How do you log out a user? Jwts are self-contained, so every information is there. You cannot stop really a user from making requests. And even, how do you even do that? And you have the logout, and you have the other thing, which is what happens if someone steals the refresh token, right? You need to have a mechanism to actually say, okay, this user reported that his refresh token has been stolen. He has a virus or something. So we need to kind of blacklist it. So there are lots of different ways, and if you want to do it correctly, by the book, it is very complex. That's why I say most of the time you should not use GWTs. But if you want to use them, I have a very simple solution. I think that works in most cases. The downside is that you will not be able to have an app like Spotify. I mean, you need to create more logic, but it kind of goes against it because like sessions do it automatically. So if you have a app like Spotify and you want to track how many active users at a time there is, then sessions is very good. Otherwise, if you just have an app where you have only, well, you can have only one user at a time for a certain account, and well, if you don't care really, right? Because Jwt won't forbid that. And if you just want to scale without any like thoughts too much about it, because if you have sessions, you will need to Redis instance just for sessions. But if you want to scale like between servers, but if you have a Jwt, you still might need to Redis, but for caching, right? So if you want to scale without thinking too much about your app, Jwts could work. Then I think it will depend of what you want to do exactly. But for here now with Jwts, let's go ahead. So this example, we have access and refresh tokens. So every time you want to get a new access token, you provide a refresh token and the server gives you back. So if you want to log out now, it's a bit complicated. Let me zoom in, out. And you basically sign in. The server gives you the access token and the refresh token pair, but at the same time, it saves the hash of the refresh token in the database. So, and upon next request, like say it's a protected route, so like a refresh, you provide the refresh token and the server will say, let me compare the hash of that refresh token to the hash I have in the database. And if it's correct, the refresh token is not blacklisted and you can get a new pair. If it's blacklisted, that means it's either stolen or you have logged out. That you cannot, like, you need to go through the sign in again, right? That's the whole system. And if you want to log out, it's quite simple. We just delete the hash of the refresh token from the database. If it sounds a bit theoretical, don't worry, because in a minute or two we're going to jump into code and code that, and I'm going to explain everything, so hopefully it's much clearer. And also, like the case is, what if a refresh token is stolen? When you connect to the client database and you manually delete the refresh token hash from the database, and that should kind of log out all the users. Obviously, users will have access from there, like until their access token is valid. It's like, for instance, something like 15 minutes. Let's say a user has logged out, well, his access token would still be valid for the remaining time. But that's the concept of GWTs. You can't really do anything about them. And trying to fix that will kind of go against the whole concept of GWTs, and it's better to use sessions in that case. Okay, so now let's jump into code. I hope that this this intro was not too messy. And let's jump into code and see how we can code that thing. Okay. I hope that this intro didn't put you off. I hope that you didn't drop before, because this is the most interesting part. This is where we're going to make the magic happen. So I have a couple of tools with me. First of all, I have my new Mac. So, oh my God, I'm so happy because I had so much problems with the old Mac. It made so much noise when I was recording. Now I can literally record everything and it doesn't even make a sound. And second, I have a cup of coffee. So that's why I'm a bit excited about the subject. Let's jump right in. I have the project here that I generated. It's just a Nest default project with Yarn. So you can create it Nest new, and then you name it the way, Nest new, and you name it the way you want. I named it NestJs Jwt. The whole source code will be available on GitHub in the description of this video below. So yeah, feel free to download it and play around with it. You know, when you learn code, when you learn a concept, the best way to learn is to really go deep in the stuff and try to understand the concept, not just trying to use them, but trying to understand it. As a programmer, I noticed a huge improvement when I started to do this simple thing. For instance, here you have a main TS file that you're probably familiar with if you have worked with NestJs, right? Like one of the things I now do every time I don't know something, for instance, this Nest factory, well, boom, I go there and I check what it is, you know, and I see that it's a constant and it accepts factory settings, and I basically check everything. I try to check that documentation, because that documentation is the best documentation ever. Like the documentation that you will get at NestJs, it's good, but a lot of things might be outdated or not explained. Here, everything is explained. You cannot lie with the code. So let's go ahead and start. First of all, we have this bootstrap script. I will put it at port 3333 because usually I'm using React for 3000. I'm going to delete this spec file here. I don't need it. In a real development, I actually use a lot of spec files. I use a lot of integration tests. Maybe if you want, we can do a video about that in the next session, because oh my God, I discovered a really nice way of testing the app, and that accelerates my development so much. And it's just a pleasure. And I'm going to share it in the next video if you guys want. So controller we don't need. And service we don't need, because we only need one app module and that's it. So let's save it. We don't need any providers, and that's about it. Let's go ahead. I have my terminal here and Jwt, oops. And let's start it to see if we didn't forget anything. Okay, that seems to start correctly. Okay, now the stack I'm going to use for this app, I'm going to use Prisma. I started to use Prisma for a while, and I think it's just amazing. It's just amazing. I was using TypeORM before. Prisma makes my life easier. So I'm going to go ahead and install Prisma. Yarn add Prisma latest. And yarn add, I think Prisma clients, something like that, right? Yep. So I think we can do npx Prisma, Prisma or Prisma init, Prisma init. So it generates the initial Prisma folder, and cool. That's all I need. Now we have a Prisma schema, and it just says that, oh, Prisma schema client, provider PostgreSQL. I'm using Postgres for the stack, by the way, so that's cool. And I'm just going to declare a model, and the model will be basically user. So we have an ID int, which is an ID, and default is auto increment. Basically, it says Prisma that it's a incrementable ID. We have created that, updated that field. We also need to have an email field. So that is going to be a string. We have the hash, so the hash that will store the user password for authentication. It will also be a string, and hashed RT. And this will be a optional string. The hash RT will store the hash of the refresh token. Refresh token is RT, and usually I do AT for access token. Okay, that's cool. Now we have created the model, and we need to generate the migrations that we're going to apply to the database. So to generate the migration, I just say, let's see if it can generate it. I doubt that it will be able to do it because it needs to have a database, but we're going to go ahead and create a database soon. Migrate dev create only. I hope it will just okay. It cannot really make them, but it's okay. It's fine. We are going to we need to create a database first. So here Prisma created a .n file for us. And basically it will inject that database URL into Prisma at runtime and every time you run migrations or something. So we need to have a database running for it to work. So I'm going to use Docker for that. If you have never used Docker, it's pretty easy to use. I really recommend it for local development. So I'm just going to copy here. Version of the Docker Compose file should be free. We will have only one service, which will be called DB. It's basically our database, and will be a Postgres of version 12. We will export the ports of the Postgres, so that means that we can do requests to that port, and it will be available on localhost. The Postgres user is Postgres, password 123, very secure as you can see, and the database is NestJs. So let's go ahead and just modify our env file to suit that. So the user is Postgres, the password is 123, and port is correct, and database is NestJs, right? So now we need to run that database. I'm going to run it here so you guys can see Docker compose up. Here we go. The database is running. We have Postgres running. So I'm going to split the terminal, and here I'm going to run my commands and everything. I can say npx prisma migrate dev, so I hope that it will migrate everything, and we will call the initial migrations in it. So basically it's just going to generate the migration files, basically saying, oh, here you have a model of user with all those fields, right? And then when we want, it will push those migrations to the database. So the database will know that it needs to have a table of user. Oh, actually, important thing I forgot, map, it should be called users, right? And we need to generate the migrations again because we just changed it, use map. Here we go. And that's basically the process that I use with Prisma when I work with Prisma. If I do changes, I generate migrations, and then when I want, I push them. Prisma comes also with a client database, so software that allows you to explore the database and change fields and everything. I usually use Table Plus, it's there. But since you guys don't have Table Plus and it's only on Mac, I'm going to use the Prisma official, similar to pgadmin. So npx Prisma Studio, and it should create that thing. Ta-da-ta-da. And of course, it might be a problematic because we didn't push the things yet. So let me just do something. So I'm going to push all the migrations to the database. Prisma db push, right? And now I'm going to separate it vertically. Oops, actually horizontally. And I'm going to use Prisma Studio here, and I'm going to use my code here, like run my Node.js code here. npx Prisma Studio. So now if we refresh, that's weird though. Okay. So it knows that it's called user. Okay, that's fine. So we have a user field with created at, updated at, email, hash, and hashed RT, so refresh token. So now we need to write the code that will actually push stuff there, right? So we are done with the configuration of the database. Sorry if it was a bit daunting, but I think it's important to point that because I think that a lot of people will be blocked there. So we have Prisma running, we have our Postgres session running. Now let's create our modules. So when creating modules, I usually like to do npx Prisma, NestJs Module, and we're going to create Auth. And that's about it, right? And yeah, of course, Prisma, because we need to use Prisma in our application. So we have two modules here, Prisma and Auth. They're automatically imported into app modules since we use the CLI. For Prisma, to be able to use Prisma in our software, we need to use, we need to add a service. Actually, we can add a service like that as well. Service, Prisma. And I forgot to say that don't create specs. Okay, now we have a Prisma service. Okay, the Prisma service, I want it to extend the Prisma client, and I want it to implement on init on module init, on module destroy. Okay, so first of all, I want to, since we're extending a object, we need to call super in the constructor. So that's the first thing, constructor, and we need to call super. So it stopped complaining about that. And it also says that we have implemented on module init and destroy, but it requires those functions to be there. So on module init and does nothing for now, and on module destroy and does nothing. And now TypeScript is happy, and let's go ahead and configure our Prisma. So when we create this is basically the client. So in our code, you can do this Prisma user create, something like that. To be able to do that, we need to inject the configuration of the Prisma at runtime. Like this is when we use the CLI, and it will fetch it directly from the database URL from the environment variables here. But we also need to say it in the code that it needs to do the same thing. So in super, we are going to provide an object with data sources and DB, and we're just going to duplicate that string for now. But obviously you should use the config module, and we might use it later on. For now, we just want to have something that works. And it is saying that maybe there's a URL. Okay, got it. Oh my God, here we go. I think that would work. So basically we say that when the module starts connected to Prisma, connected to the database, and we say this, connect, and when we destroy the module, this disconnect, I guess. Awesome. And maybe it should be an async and an await here, and async and await here. Okay, now we have configured the Prisma. It's a bit daunting, but it's how NestJs work. You use the dependency, you create a service for that, you configure it so it works, all right? And now Prisma should be working, and we can leave it alone. Now let's go ahead, let's go into Auth module and create the Auth controller and Auth service. So npx NestJs controller Auth and no spec, and also a service. Cool. So now we have those created. We have those imported into the module, and we can work on the Auth. So first things first, let's think about what are the modules, like what are the components of our app we need. And we go into the controller, and we will need, based on that thing, we will need to have a local sign-in. Local is because, well, you can sign in with Google, with Facebook, with social providers, with a lot of things. Local just means email password, like the traditional thing. So local sign-in, local sign-up, Auth refresh, and Auth logout. So we kind of have 4 routes, right? Let's go ahead and do them. So the first is post local sign-up, right? And we go sign up local, and we can duplicate that for sign in local. Oops. We can, and we also need to have logout, and also we need to have refresh. So sign in local and logout and refresh tokens, right? So that's the first thing. We also need to inject the Auth service in the controller, because dependency injection. private auth service. Auth service. By the way, when we write private, that just means that. You probably know it, but if you don't know it, that is just a shorthand for that, right? So instead of like doing that, we just say private in the parentheses here, and we need to define the same functions in the service. That's usually the pattern. So here, and we have that function and that one and that one, and the controller should call the sign up local, sign in local, logout. Oh my god, this auth service logout and this auth service refresh. Here we go. Most of it is fine. So we have all the routes defined. Now let's create a user, right? Let's make the logic for creating a user. So in this service, we can inject the Prisma, private Prisma, and Prisma service. Sorry for the messages. I'm going to mute my phone so we're not bothered by that. Also, Prisma, very interesting fact here, Prisma module, it needs to be global. So I don't have to import the module in my auth service. So I don't have to use import Prisma module, right? I don't want to do that in all my things. So usually if a module needs to be imported in a lot of like other modules, I do global, and it comes from Nest common, and just do exports the same Prisma service. Here we go. We have set up the basic thing here, and we can go back to auth controller and write the first logic. So for the sign up, what we do is that we need to provide some arguments, right? So it will be email and password. Usually we use DTOs. So we create DTO, right? I'm going to use a Baron export. So every folder would have a index.ts file that would kind of export all the files inside it. So it's just a handy way to have cleaner path. And we're going to have auth.dto class here, and export class auth.dto. Let me quit WhatsApp. So we will have an email field, which will be a string, and a password field, which will be a string as well. And in the Baron export all from auth.dto, right? And now in the signup local, we can say, well, I want the body to be mapped to the auth.dto. Oh my god, am I getting still the messages? I don't understand. And we pass the DTO to the function, and of course, since the function signature has changed, we also need to update it here. auth.dto, right? And now we can create our user. So const new user is equal to this Prisma create user create data, and we put the data that we want to put. So email would be dto.email, and password. For the password, we need to hash it first. So we're going to use bcrypt. But before doing that, we need to think something about the model. So I just remember it because if we go back into the Prisma, email is a string, but it should be unique. So we are going to pass that unique. And that's a good example of development with Prisma. So you see you have found an error. Here email should be like unique. And the way to do it is, the way to fix it is that you come back, you generate new migration. So npx Prisma, and npx Prisma migration, migrate dev. You can, if you leave it like that, it will automatically try to apply them. But I think in most cases, I like to create them first. Yeah. Email unique. And then only I want to apply them. db push. Sorry, Prisma db push. Yes. Okay, and now if I go back to our Prisma Studio, I think email should be unique. I don't see if it's unique. It should be unique. Let's say it's unique, and we can actually check that this Prisma user find unique, and email should be there, right? So it considers email as unique, so it's good. It's fine. Our logic is working. Let's go ahead now. This is a DTO, so we need to validate the input first. So we need to make sure that email is not empty and password is not empty, and that all of those are strings basically. So the way to do it is to use a class validator in NestJs. So class validator. I don't remember all the things by heart, so that's why I'm like using the documentation. And as a programmer, you should use it quite a lot too, actually. Yarn add those things, and I will come back. I'll come back into DTO and say that is string is not empty, and it should import it from class validator, and it should also be isString. Here we go. It's not empty and is a string, and that should be okay. I think now it won't be really applied unless we go into here and we do app use global pipes, new validation. And now if we call that route, if we call the auth controller and the email or the password is not defined, well, we will get an error. Let's try that. We come back here in our terminal and start the app, yarn dev. Everything is working, that's good. Everything is compiling. And we go to Postman, create a new request. It will be a post request, HTTP. Here you got auth local sign up. And we won't provide anything. So if we call it, it says email must be a string, email should not be empty, etc. because our pipes are working. So very good. That is working. We won't create the user just now because we don't have even the logic programmed. So let's go ahead and program the logic. But now we can be sure that, well, we will have an email and we will have a password, and we don't really need to do like logic to verify that they're there. Like it's handled by the authentication. Sorry, it's handled by the validation. We need to use bcrypt to encrypt the password. So we need to install it first. Yarn add bcrypt, and we might also need to install the types of bcrypt. So yarn add types bcrypt. And in the meantime, we can import all as bcrypt from bcrypt, right? And we can close it. We are actually going to make a helper function called hash data that will take a data, which will be a string, and it will return the decrypt hash data, and the salt round will be 10. So that way we can just do hash is equal this hash data, and it's in a sync function. So await detail the password, and the user, when we create it, we just provide the hash like that. So now we basically have created a user in the database, but there's also one field that we kind of forgot, and it's the hashed refresh token. But that means that we need to create access tokens. So let's go ahead and use the power of TypeScript to say that this controller should be actually returning something interesting. So let's go ahead here and use the folder types, and I'm going to create a Baron export. It takes a bit of time, all that, guys, but I'm trying to really explain it how it is really done. Like the main problem with a lot of tutorials out there is that they just tackle some niche things and they don't explain that thing in context. But of course, explaining something in context takes time. So this is what we're doing here. Sorry if it's a bit long and a bit tedious, but this is what we really do when we implement Jwt access and refresh tokens. All that needs to be done, otherwise there's no point, right? So we're going to create a types of tokens, just a helper. It's going to be a type.ts export type tokens, and a type if is access token, which will be a string, and refresh token, which will also be a string, and we export that from following the Baron export pattern. And now we can say the signup local actually should return a promise of tokens, right? So now we know what we need to return. It's very clear. We're not lost here. Same here and there. Oh, sorry. Oh my God. From types. Okay. So we need to import the access. We need to export the access and refresh token. For that, we need to use JWTs. Finally, you might say, because since then all we have done is basically do some setup code. Well, yeah, that takes time. So let's go ahead and install everything that we need to generate JWTs. We're going to first create a folder called strategies, because we are strategies. We're just going to use passport for that. So let's check the documentation of NestJs, and it's passport Jwt or something. Yeah, Jwt functionality. There's a bunch of stuff we need to install here, but I'll guide you through all of that. So first of all, we don't need passport local. We need Jwt functionality. We need Jwt and passport Jwt. Okay, that to begin with. Yarn add all that. We also need that as a dev dependency. Yarn add, and we also might need passport that was installed earlier. Yarn add, and I think we're all good. We have everything that we need installed. Now we're going to create the strategies. Basically, the strategy is something that will verify that we have the right token, right? So JWTs are all about token creation and token verification. So once we sign in, that logic will not be handled by passport. It will be handled by JSON Web Token Library. So it will generate, it will generate the access and the refresh token, and this is, we're going to write it in a custom way. We write it by hand, but when the user calls refresh, this is where the passport will verify that it has the right refresh token, and in that case it verifies that it has the right access token. So So what are we going to do is, yeah, we need to create a strategy. So Baron export as always. Then we name one AT strategy, at.strategy .ts, and the other one will be RT, so for refresh token, strategy.ts. And the AT strategy, let's close that and focus on that. AT strategy with export class AT Jwt access token strategy. The naming always is like super bad. Extends passport, and now I'm not really sure. Okay, we need to extend passport strategy coming from Nest Passport, and it's going to use the passport this strategy here, strategy, and this strategy is going to be called Jwt. This is how we are going to reference it elsewhere. That's it. And what else? It will have a constructor. And it will call super. And this is and we need to provide those fields here. Just first field is how are we going to get the token? Well, extract the token from headers. So that means that when we call something, we're going to put something in authorization and say bearer and then the token, right? And this just means that, oh, extract the token from there. And ignore expiration false. We can actually delete that because the default is false. And the secret or key. So this is the secret password with which we're going to sign the tokens. So the access token will have its own secret, and the refresh token will have its own secret. So that's it for now. We also have a validate function that we need to implement, and it will receive the payload of any, and the payload will be basically the decoded JavaScript, like the decoded things. So it will receive that. So basically, when the token is received by passport, it will decode it into that, and it will pass that object into that payload. And what we want to do is just return the payload. And that way, since NestJS is using Express under the hood, it's going to do exrect.user is equal payload. This is what it is going to do. It's going to attach the payload to the user object, right? And this happens because the validate function just works like that. You need to accept that it works like that. And we also need to do the same for RT strategy. And we're going to call it RT strategy. And the name is Jwt refresh. And here, very important thing is that we need to say that we want to get back the refresh token. So for instance, in Jwt strategy, it takes a token, it kind of destroys it, and it returns the payload. What we want in RT strategy is to get the payload plus the token, because we need to do some further stuff. We need to hash it, for instance, right? So if we want to hash it, like we said here, if we want to hash the refresh token, here, compare the hash of refresh token, we actually need to get it. So if the password destroys it, we cannot get it. So we need to tell password to pass it. So it will just pass the RIC, and it's going to be of type request from Express. And if it looks like I'm doing magic, guys, don't worry, I researched it before actually doing the video. So I'm kind of following more or less a pattern. So don't worry about that. And of course, the secret should be RT secret and not AT secret. You can put anything there, but just for demo purposes, I don't want to make it too complex either. Normally it should be stored into config, so in environment variables, but here we're just going to hard code it, and later on we can actually create a config file. But just so you understand the whole concept, and we export all those classes, AT strategy and RT strategy. And also, since we're going to use them as a provider, we want to make it as injectable. That way, I think it might even work without, but it is supposed to, you're supposed to use injectable, to be honest. And we're going to import that into the Auth module as providers, AT strategy and RT strategy, right? And if it doesn't, okay, there's something wrong. Oh, that's fine. That's fine. It's the error comes from the fact that we have a promise set and we don't return. We have a promise of tokens and we don't return that. So there's no errors related to passport, which is good. And also in RT strategy, since we need to also return the refresh token, we can do something like that. A refresh token is equal rec.get authorization. Okay, authorization, and we just replace the bearer by null because we don't need the bearer thing, and we trim it so we get the refresh token, and then we return the payload and the refresh token, right? Okay, we're done here with the RT strategy. If that sounds a bit weird, don't worry, it's normal. It's the first time I worked with that, I found it weird as well, but hopefully everything will make more sense as when we progress. So back into Auth service, we basically have programmed logic that checks if our tokens are valid. But now we need to generate our tokens. So for that we can use JSON Web Token library, but NestJs has a module that wraps that library around the module. And since we're using NestJs, why not using that? All right, so I think it's called something like Jwt Module, and it should be somewhere here, Jwt Module. NestJs Jwt, and we actually installed that already. So let's go back into module and import it here. Import Jwt module for register, and that's all we need. Usually here you'll provide something like signature and secrets, expiration date, but since we need to generate two tokens, so access token and refresh tokens, we don't want to do it here. We're going to do it inside the service. So let me explain. Here, once we have created the user and everything is fine, actually here is an await, we need to generate tokens for that. So let's go ahead and create also a helper function so our code is clear. We're going to call it sign or something get tokens or sign user. Let's call it get tokens. And what we are going to sign is user ID, which will be a number, and email, which will be a string. And that's pretty much it. This is the info that we want to put into the JSON Web Token. So this is the info that we want to put here, and we can choose the info that we want to put. Like it's up to you. We will have sub, we will have email. You can have a role, for instance, if you have like admin, super users and stuff like that. You can put anything, but it needs to be like it needs to be okay if people can access it publicly, because you should not put password or any sensitive data there. Don't do that. It's going to be an async because I want to sign the thing asynchronously. Okay, so what are we going to do? First of all, we're going to sign the refresh token, no, the access token. So access token would be, and we need to import the the Jwt service that comes from Jwt module that we have registered here. So private Jwt service, Jwt service, and it will have functions like sign, Jwt service, sign async, and we just provide the object that we want to sign. It will be sub, which will be user ID, and email, which will be email, and that's about it. And here we can provide configurations such as expires in. Well, that's the most important for us. Expires in will be 15 minutes. So the number here is expressed in seconds. So it will be 60 seconds times 15. So that gives us 15 minutes, right? And how are we going to do that is that since it's async, we can do access AT, let's call it AT and RT, await promise all, and this is going to be the first thing that we're going to sign, and this is going to be the second thing, and of course the secret as well, secret, and we just need to check into the AT, the secret that we have. It's important that those secrets passwords kind of match, and I'm just using something really dumb here, but obviously it needs to be a random strings of character that you should not share, otherwise your application is kind of compromised. And here in the other strategy, it will be secret is RT secret, and basically this is the access token, and this is the refresh token, and the refresh token should have not 15 minutes, but something like a week. So let's say it's like, this is 1 hour, this is 1 day times 7. Here we go, and we need to now return it, and we're going to use the power of TypeScript. So here we say return us an object of those access tokens equal AT, and a refresh token is equal to AT, right? And here we go, our RT. Our function is should work correctly. And now once we generated the user, what we do is that we get the tokens, where these get tokens. We need to provide the user ID, so new user.id and new user.email, and we return those tokens. And now since the return type matches, we should not have any error, and we still have an error here, sign up local, a function those, interesting, let me check that. So, oh yeah, of course I forgot to return it. Here we go, and now our server is compiling, amazing. Now just before returning the tokens, we said that once the user signs in or signs up, we need to save the hash of the refresh token in the database. So we are also going to create a helper function for that. Let's call it async update RT hash or something. And what we need is a user ID and the hash, pretty much, right? Or no, refresh token. Here we go, and it's going to be a string. Actually, let's call it RT to be correct. And what we're going to do first is to generate the hash. Hash is equal to this hash data RT, and it's an async. So here we go, and then we do await this Prisma user update, where ID of the user is user ID, and the data that we update is, oh my god, the data that we update is hashed RT is equal to hash. And that's it. And so before returning it, we can say this update rt hash, and we provide the user dot id, sorry, new user dot id, and we provide the tokens dot refresh token. So that actually does what we need to do. Now let's go ahead and implement a similar logic for actually I had this function here. What is it called? Yeah, for the other functions. So let's just organize our code a bit. So those are the utility functions. Utility functions, I usually put them at the end, and this is like not really utility function. Like for me, utility functions are more like pure functions. They just get an input and get an output, and this actually changes the database, so it will be there. At that point, we can actually go ahead and generate a user to see what it does, because for now we have been coding for quite some time. Let's go back to the local sign up and create a user and see if we get the right answer, right? So auth local sign up, and we go to here for URL encoded, and email would be test@gmail.com, and password would be 12345. Very secure, as you can see. Let's go ahead and generate it, and voila, we have access token and a refresh token. And if we go and copy that and put that into jwt.io, we have the right data, and we can go in Prisma and refresh that and see that we have actually created a new user. Let me make it bigger with the hash of the refresh token. So it's just really cool, right? So let's go ahead and implement the sign-in route. So those two routes will be kind of public routes. This will not be public, and this will not be public, and we're going to implement that pretty quickly. So for the sign-in, it's quite easy, to be honest, as well. So we are going to provide a DTO of auth DTO, and of course here we also need to provide the auth DTO, and it should also return the promise of tokens to us. So first of all, we need to find the user by the email, right? Find the user by that email and compare the hash of the password, so to make sure that the password that is provided is correct. So user is equal await this Prisma user find unique where email is equal to dto.email, right? And here we say if not user, if for some reason the user is not found, throw new forbidden exception, something like access denied. And now we need to compare the password. Password matches is equal to await decrypt verify. Come on, decrypt verify. Where's verify? Compare. Okay, compare, and it takes the data, so the dto.password, and it takes the hash, so user.hash. And if not password matches, then we also throw the same error. Here we go. Now, if all that is correct, we can assume that the password is correct, and what we do is that we just copy here the logic here. So we generate new tokens again, and it should be user. And we update the hash, right? So we save that, and here we need to say that it returns the promise of tokens. So our controller is happy, and there's something wrong here saying function. Interesting. Oh, again, I forgot to return. Oh my god. And here it's actually the same problem, right? So now we can go here into our Postman and create another route with the same kind of stuff, and we can sign in, right? And check the hash here. So it's ending by, oh my god, it's ending by LU/ALU. So we're going to sign in. It should get us new tokens, and the hash should change. Yeah, and it did change. So that proves that our logic is kind of working. Obviously, when you're developing your application, your real application, you write tests, you write integration tests to test all that. But for now, it will work. Okay, so those two routes are basically public routes. And I'm going to make a short break. You can make one as well. And we're going to get back to our code to implement the Jwt authentication and refresh tokens on those two routes. See you shortly. Hello, and we are back. And I think I got a new energy source again, which means another cup of coffee, because I just have been recording for the whole hour. And guys, it actually takes a lot of energy, to be honest. And I think that you saw that my voice tone kind of lowered down as we were going, but I will try to maintain it at a constant rate and try to transmit all the excitement that I have about that subject, because this subject really made my life miserable for a long time. And now that I got it, I think that I wanna just share it. Okay, so we have our local sign up and our local sign in working, right? And yeah, by the way, since we're there, I will delete that because it doesn't make like it can work without, and it's more beautiful, I think. And we need to implement the logout functionality. So what is the logout functionality? Here, basically we call the server saying I want to log out, so meaning delete my hashed RT, so nobody could refresh my credentials and get new access tokens, and I just want to, like, next time I want to do it, I just want to go through sign in or sign up thing, whatever. So this is what we're going to do. This function is pretty easy. So what it is going to do is that it's going to take a user ID, which will be a number. And later on, it's going to just, it's going to this Prisma user update. And here, one small trick is that I'm going to use update many and not update, because if I do update, it just takes basically the unique fields. And I can either say where I'm ID or where email, so ID is equal user ID, but I cannot say, for instance, where hashed refresh token is not null. That I cannot do, but I could do it in update many. And the reason why I want to do it is that let's say somebody wants to spam my logout button or something. I don't want to get I don't want to have a lot of database calls setting basically that field to null, because when it's not null basically. So I just will say hashed refresh token, I think not null, right? And the data I'm going to update is hashed refresh token is equal null. So that means that, hey, get all the users, get the user by user ID only if the hash token is not null, and set it to null. And that's about it. And here it's complaints because it expects a user ID and we don't provide it. So for now we just want to comment that out. Also, those ones, I want to set a custom code. So HTTP code, HTTP status would be created. Oops, created. It will just return 201. This will return OK. So 200. This will return 200, and this will return 200 pretty much. Because usually if the default behavior of a POST request in a REST standard is that it returns 201 because it's supposed to create a resource. Here I just want to return 200, right? So that would work, but now the problem is that we should get the user ID. And the user ID, where should it get it from? Well, we should get it from the token. Here, the subfield. And for that, we need to use Jwt tokens with passport. So let's go ahead and use those. So we want to log out here, and let's implement it. So how it works is that you need to put the strategy in a guard. So basically, a guard is like a function in front of your route that will say, okay, can you execute or not? And basically, it will check for the access token, and it will check, for instance, for the expiration date and if the signature is correct. And if it is, it will allow you to call logout. And if it's not, it will throw you a 401 kind of exception. So the way to put the guard in front of our route is to go to controller and use the NestJs Guards, and they have a Auth guard already defined, and it comes, I think, from where did it come from? Yeah, Auth guard is a guard that comes from Passport, so it is aware that we're using Passport.js, and here we just need to say what is the name of the strategy, and it's Jwt, because we have named it Jwt here. So had we name it differently, we would have to put a different thing. For instance, here that would be Jwt, but for the refresh token, that would be Jwt refresh, right? And that will expect us to provide a Jwt refresh token. So that's about it. So what is doing Passport? Passport, remember, it takes the token, it decodes it in a payload, and the payload, just so you know, well, just so you have an idea what it is, Jwt payload. Let's put it. It will be sub, it will be a string, it will be an email, which will be a string. So those are the two fields we have defined. Obviously, it will have other ones. So it's basically that. So it will return that object to be, so you can use it in your app. And the way to use it, I said, remember before, is that it attaches that object to the rec.user. So we need to have access to the rec.user, and let's go ahead and do it here. Later on, we'll use a much more cleaner way of doing so, but for now, let's just go ahead and use it. So rec, and it's of type request, and I think it comes from user. And what we're doing here is that we say user is equal rec.user, right? And here we provide user.id. So we basically get the user object from the request that is attached by the strategy, and we pass the ID of it. And it's you know what we're going to do. That I think that would work. User.id. Okay, yeah, we're going to use something like that. Obviously, this is really it's not good. So we're going to create another way of doing so. But for now, let's just test it, okay? For now, let's just test if that works. So our code is executed, so that means we don't have errors. We'll go back in Postman. Let's go ahead and sign in again. So we receive a new set of keys. We have access token and refresh token. we copy the access token, and we go back to logout, right? And here in authorization, sorry, in headers, we set authorization bearer, and we paste that access token, not the refresh token. And we check our Prisma. So once I execute that, the hash should be set to null. And we have a 200. That means everything is working correctly. And if I refresh, the hashed is set to null. So this is something that we want to do. And I can call it different times. It does nothing pretty much, right? So everything is working correctly. We can do the same for the refresh tokens. Let's go ahead and program that logic first, because we haven't programmed that logic yet. So for the refresh token, what should it do? If we come back to our diagram here, where's our refresh thing? We call the refresh. It compares the hash of the current refresh token with the hash of the refresh token that we have stored in the DB, and if it fits, it returns the token. Okay, let's think a bit how we are going to do that, and clean that a bit. So RT strategy, it returns the payload and it returns the refresh token. So if we go back here, we need to have what? We need to have the user ID, first of all, because we need to have the user ID, and then we need to have RT. So it would be a string. And we do the same thing here. We get the request and we get the user, and we say user.it and user what happens? Refresh token. And that should be it. So now we can get the user first. User is equal, it's an async function. Await this Prisma user find unique, where ID is equal user ID. All right. And well, first of all, if there's no user, throw new forbidden exception, access denied, something like that. And then we're going to compare the hash of the refresh token. So RT matches is equal to bcrypt compare RT with the user dot hashed RT, right? So if RT does not matches, well, you cannot get a new pair of tokens. So throw access denied, or more importantly, let's just throw access denied for now. We don't really care. And if it works, what we do, we just repeat the logic that we have set here. We generate the tokens, we update the hash of the user, and we return those tokens. So this is how refresh is working. And let's go ahead and use that. We are now logged out, so we need to sign in again. So if I try to call logout, for instance, it will not do anything. But if I try to do a refresh, it will say unauthorized. First of all, because we have provided a access token instead of a refresh token, and second of all, because, well, the hash is null. So let's go ahead and sign in. Auth local sign in, and we need to provide the body here. So we have a access token and the refresh token, and now we're going to save the refresh token and call out refresh. And it's okay. It says undefined. Now we need to go to headers and add the bearer token to that, which will be this time a refresh token, bearer. And that should send us, oh, interesting, internal error. So let's see what went wrong. It says lines with things are optional. Find unique. So something is wrong with the auth service 59. It's here. Something is wrong with the way we fetch the, oh, of course. That is actually bad because it is a subfield here. I think we fucked up something there, guys. Yeah, but how come the update menu was working for the logout? I think it update menu was not behaving the way I thought it would behave. This is why tests are important, guys. I fucked up big time because I was getting the ID while in the token it was sub. That's why TypeScript is kind of important. And let's make sure we yeah, this happens because I was like doing it manually, and I was not using the power of TypeScript, and I was not using all the tools that NestJs gives us. So basically, I assumed that it was ID, but in reality, the access token has a subfield here. So this kind of worked because I used update many, and I need to investigate that, but that's bad. And it basically should be used sub and not ID. So in that case, that is working. We get new access tokens, and if we log out, that should work as well. There, logout. Here we go. That's why also the, yeah. Okay, so good to know. We have now then implemented everything. And now let's see how we can improve our application. First of all, the guards, we can create custom guards and use that instead of like having the strings here. That's the first thing we can do. Second, that user, and the reason why we got that error from the user is because we used that kind of approach, and so TypeScript was not able to tell us, the ID field does not exist. So I kind of forced it. So now we're going to use a decorator for that. Let's start with the guards and then with the decorator. So we will add a common folder here, and we'll add decorators and guards. So for the guards, index.ts for the Baron export, and it would be atguard.ts and rtguard.ts. So at is export class atguard extends AuthGuard Jwt constructor super, because when we are extending something we need to call super, and same thing for the rt, except that will be rtguard, right? And atguard is pretty much simple, and rtguard as well. We export those, atguard and rtguard, right? So now in our controller, instead of having that, we can just say atguard, and here will be rtguard, right? that's it. Next thing, the decorators. It's what we're doing here is quite bad, so let's go ahead and change that. Decorators, it will be index.ts and get current user .decorator.ts. And for the decorator, it will be a param decorator. So export const and get current user, create param decorator. The param decorator is taking a context, execution context, and what it does is that it is supposed to get the user. So context get HTTP context, switch to HTTP, get request, and what we are saying is that we return request.user, right? And we also can provide data, which will be a string or undefined. So if not data, we just return request .user, and else we return request user data. So that way, if we just want to get the subfield, we can just say something like, let me just check if the decorator is exported, and here we go. We need to get, what happens here? What happens? Get current user, and we need to do user ID, number, and give me the subfield, right? And in that case, it's going to be a number. We know pretty much. Yeah, user ID. There are better ways of doing so. For instance, you can have get current user ID decorator, and instead of like having a get user current user, we can just get the user ID. So we can even do that if we want. That will, I think, further make sure that we don't have get current user ID problems, because here we know that it's a sub, and yep, so we can export it here and import it there. So here we are sure that it's a ID, actually get current user ID, and it says that it returns that. I'm wondering if it's possible to tell it that it's a number. I'm wondering. Yeah, I'm not sure if it understood actually, but yeah, basically we know that it's a user ID, even though behind the hood it's a sub. So there will not be any confusion, and we can actually do the same thing here, right? So except that here it's not get current user ID, it's current user refresh token. Actually, refresh token, yes. So it will be refresh token. It will be a string, and refresh token, and we also can get the ID, get current user ID, which will be a user ID. User ID number. Okay. and user ID. So hopefully it's all tested out. Now the thing is, this will accept the Jwt guard, but this will accept the RT guard, right? So everything is pretty much clear. But you know, our application will grow, so we will have more modules than just the Auth module. So that means, and in our application, a lot of like endpoints are protected by JWTs. Like most of the endpoints in your app will be protected by the AT guard. But it's not very efficient to actually go ahead and set it at every handle. Imagine you have like hundreds of handle, and handles is that's a handle, that's a handle, and that's a class. There are several solutions. You can either set it globally, or set it by class, or set it by handle. Usually I set that globally, right? And on the routes that I want to keep public, so the routes that don't need the JWT token, I say something like public, right? That requires the use of metadata, but I think that makes the application much more readable. So let's go ahead and implement that. So first of all, we're going to get rid of the use guards here. We are going to implement it. We're going to implement it at the global level, right? So we are going to go ahead in main.ts and say app use global guards. And here we say, what's the name again? It's AT guard, right? So all good here. But now the AT guard will basically require the access token for everything. So even though this is supposed to be public, if we want to like sign in, local sign in, and we just disable that and send that, it will say unauthorized because it wants the JWT. So to be able to say, I don't use the AT guard for that route, we need to create we need to use metadatas basically. So the way to do it is that we are going to create a decorator, and we say something like is public, like public.decorator.ts. And here is going to be a export class public is equal to set metadata, and it's a function provided by NestJs, and it's just a key value that is accessible by other codes if you want. So is public, and it's going to be true. Wait, is public is true? Yeah. And what's happening here? Oh, sorry, export const public. So it's basically a function that returns the call to set metadata is public to true, and we need to export that from public. And we're almost done, guys. We're almost done. So here we are going to say public. So those routes should not be used in the AT guard. And now we need to go to the AT guard and tell it, well, every time you see something with public, please don't check for access token, right? So we go to AT guard, and the way to check if a handler, so this is a handle, or a class has some metadata is to use the reflector. So it's let's do it here. So we're going to inject private reflector, and it comes from NestJs. Sadly, because we are using it in a global, like here in the global bootstrap script, it does not support dependency injection. Like there are several ways, several solutions to that. We can either use it here, but then we need to create a reflector, is equal new reflector, and pass it there to simulate the dependency injection, or we can use it in app module. So here that will be providers, and it's going to be provide app guard, and we say use class, and it's going to be AT guard. So there are two ways of doing those things, either in the app module or like that. In the app module, it will automatically detect the, it will automatically inject the reflector. But if we're doing it in global, we need to do it by ourselves. So it's two ways. In that case, I'm going to use it in app module. I don't really have a preference for either of those. Like if it's something simple, you can leave it in app bootstrap. But if your guard requires a lot of dependency injections, then it might be actually good to, like if the guard requires a Prisma or like stuff like that, it's better to put it here. So this solution is more scalable, but a bit more ugly, because you see that is uglier than that. But I'm going to leave it here, so you guys know how to do it either ways. And now we go back to the AT guard, because we need to say to the AT guard if you detect something. So for instance, since it's a guard, it implements can activate, and basically the can activate function, it says if it's true, then it will not activate. So it will not check for what it is supposed to check. So if I set it to true, it will let me sign in, and it will bypass it if you want. If I set it to false, it will block everything pretty much. Even like it will block everything. Even if I provide a good Jwt, it will block it, because I said whatever happens, it's false. Don't let it go. So we just need to create some conditions here. We need to say if we detect a is public metadata, you see, is public set to true, then we bypass it. Otherwise, we don't bypass it, and we execute the can activate of the auth card, right? So it will be something like return super.can activate here. Oh yeah, and yeah, we need to pass the context. The context should be there. Context, execution context, and it's very similar to what we had in the param decorator. So basically here we need to use the reflector. So public is equal to this reflector, and get all and override. This is what we're going to do. We are looking for which metadata? We are looking for is public metadata. And where are we going to look for it? Well, by priorities. First of all, the handler, context get handler, and then context get class. So that means, so try to get the is public metadata. First of all, check it on the handler, and if you don't find anything, check it on the class. This is a class. And if you don't find anything at all, it will be false. And if you find something that is true, just return true. So basically, if is public, return true. So if the endpoint is public, bypass it, bypass the guard. Otherwise, execute the guard based on the guard that we're extending, and we are extending auth guard. And auth guard will automatically detect the strategy, and it will check if the token is correct and everything. So here is our guard, and here is it done. So now if we sign in, it should work. Ooh la la, something is not working. Okay, let's check what is not working. Cannot read properties of undefined, reading get all and override. Interesting. Why is it not working? And I think the reason why it's not working is that it is not declared as injectable. So let's go ahead and try that, and it is working. So don't forget to put injectable when it requires injection, dependency injection. So our guard, this one does not really require a dependency injection. This one does, so injectable, right? And I think there's another one, public decorator, get current user. Yeah, it does not really require dependency injection. So that's quite interesting. So now it's working. We can sign in. We can log out. So log out, authorization, there. It logs you out, so logged out. And if you try to refresh, very important thing about refresh, right? So let's go ahead, local sign in. Local sign in. So we get the refresh token. Let's say we want to refresh now. What do you think will happen? Bearer, refresh token. Okay. So if I do like that, it will say 401. Why? Because if we go back to, let's close everything and open auth.not.DTO controller. If we go here and we check what is happening here, this route says I want to use Jwt Guard, a refresh token guard, and that's fine. But before that guard is executed, there's another guard that is executed globally, and this guard is access token guard. So in order to avoid to execute that guard, we need to put public here as well. So what is happening is that we say bypass the auth access token guard, then use the other guard that we have defined, the RT guard. And in that case, if we do it like that, we should be able to refresh the tokens. And it's not working either. So let's see what is going on here. Yeah, everything is working correctly. It is working well. It's written 401. Interesting. Let's see what's going on. Have we okay, have we signed the thing correctly? So sign in local, where is that? AT secret, IRT secret. The signature seems to be correct. So what is there here in the strategy, AT secret, RT secret? So the signatures seem to be correct. Okay. What is happening with the guards we have defined in the common thing? So AT guard is Jwt and RT guard. Oh, here, this is the error. Jwt refresh. It should be refresh here. And now if we do it again, now we have a 500 error. Well, it's good. That means some progress. Data and hash arguments required. So auth secret, data and hash arguments required. So we're not passing something. Refresh token. So user ID and RT, and if we call that route, we get let's console log those. Probably something is happening with those things and it is not working like I was expecting it. Let's call that again and see what is happening there. User ID, but refresh token is undefined. Okay, let's see what is going on here. It is supposed, the strategy is supposed to put the refresh token here in the user. And get current user, is it working correct? Oh yeah, I'm stupid. Like this was a stupid move. Of course, it's not data, it's data as a variable. This was a very stupid move. I hope you guys have seen it before me. So now, if we do it again, that should work. Finally. So let's recap. we are logging out with access token. Right, we are logged out. We want to refresh. It won't work unauthorized, so we need to sign in with the body. And now we get the access pair, like the access and the refresh token pair. And now if we want to refresh, go to headers and say bearer, a new set of tokens is created, so it's finished by GQ. As soon as we refresh, the hash changes. So basically, if we do logout, if we want the user to log out, he needs to call that endpoint, and he will not be able to refresh the refresh token and access tokens anymore, right? If we notice that a user is compromised, what we do, well, we just go into database client and we say hash refresh token null. So if he tries to refresh again, sorry, null. And actually it should not be 500. And what is happening here again? It's incredible. Everything is there. ID is okay, refresh token is okay. And it says data and hash argument required. Okay, something is wrong. Let's recompile everything. So if we are going to refresh it, we get the right values, but it is saying that data and hash argument required. Something is wrong with our logic then. User ID, RT. Oh yeah, okay, I see. It's because we're trying to compare the hash, but since we logged the user out, well, it's logged out, so we just need to create a new condition. If not user or not user hash RT, we throw that exception. And now if we do it again, now we see that access is denied. And I think that's it, folks. I'm just going to clean here, verify that everything is correct. And to what I have found, I think that this is like one of the best ways to handle authentications with Jwt if you want to do it alone, like if you want to create it. So you have those guards, and the most important thing I think in this video is that concept of logout and refresh and how it's supposed to work together. So I'm going to upload the source code of the project on GitHub. Feel free to download it, play around with it. If you have any suggestions, if you have any other questions, I'm more than welcome to examine those and maybe make some other videos. Sorry it took so long, but this subject is quite complex, and as you have seen, programming it like that without doing any testing and stuff like that, testing it manually, it can yield a lot of errors and it can create like a lot of problems. So I hope it was useful for you guys. Leave a like, subscribe if you haven't, and see you in the next video.